how did your NFL team do in this year's 2022 NFL Draft? What's going on, bottom line viewers? It's Mitch here to give you my 2022 NFL Draft grades for every team in the NFL, all 32 teams. My grades are based on a few things mixed in to the formula. So first and foremost, did they address their needs? Because at the end of the day, if they address their needs, specifically at the top of the draft, I can't really be mad about that. If they address their needs, no matter who the player is, no matter if I love them or if I hate them, I have to give them credit for that because we don't know who's going to be good in the draft. We don't know if the first rounder is going to be a stud supreme. We don't know if the fifth rounder is a diamond in the rough. At the end of the day, nobody knows. So did you address your needs? Then I mix in my thoughts on the actual players and give you my opinion based on my evaluation of those players. And lastly, did you address positions that are impactful in the modern NFL? Did you draft a bunch of punters and guards and running backs? Or did you draft wide receivers, quarterbacks, DNs, and guys that can actually change your franchise? That does matter to me as well in looking at the actual grade and the impact and the influence for long-term success in the NFL. That's how I do my grades. Now, let's give you my grades. But before I do, make sure that you do spike the like button and subscribe to the channel for more BLV. Let's get to the grades. We're going in alphabetical order here, starting off with the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals first round pick actually went to trade here. Marquise Brown was the trade from the Baltimore Ravens. Marquise Brown has chemistry with Kyler Murray. Obviously, that was a go-to connection in college. So that's going to be fascinating to watch in Arizona. I think it's going to be great for Marquise Brown to get away from that run-heavy system of Baltimore and be that number 2 to D-Hop's number 1 and open up the vertical passing game for Kyler Murray and open up the underneath for D-Hop. I really think that's going to have a big impact on this offense. But I will say this, Marquise Brown is not worth a first round pick, especially in his fourth year, right? He's going to get paid soon. So you're basically paying a first round pick for a guy who's a number 2 receiver, a quality number 2 with some speed. He's going to help you, but it was a big cost. So it's good and it's bad to me with that first round trade. Trey McBride was the best tight end in this class. He's somebody that was the go-to target for his school, and he's going to contribute possibly down the road more so than short-term as a receiving option with Zach Ertz still there for Kyler Murray. So he could maybe contribute a little bit with some 2 tight end sets sort of deal, but I don't think he's really going to be a true starter until long term. Cameron Thomas is a big jumbo D end. They definitely needed to add some beef to the defensive line. They got Cameron Thomas. They got Sanders as well. So I like how they addressed those positions, which were positions of need. I would have liked for them to address the offensive line a little bit better than they did. They weren't able to really attack the offensive line other than Smith from Virginia Tech in the 6th round. So 6th round, I mean, probably not going to have a huge impact short term. And then also cornerback was a big position that they just didn't address. So for that, I think there were some good things and there were some bad things. Overall, I would give this draft a C+. I like McBride, I like Thomas to be exact, and I think Marquise Brown helps them, but I did not see them address some of their biggest needs. So that's why it's an okay draft for the Arizona Cardinals. The next team is the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons, I thought, actually had a very low-key, very solid draft. I don't think it was anything spectacular, don't get me wrong, but it was very good. And a start of a new regime, I feel like, in a new era of Atlanta Falcons football. You get Drake London, who was personally my number 3 receiver in this draft. He went first in the draft. Some people had him graded first, so totally understand that. You needed a receiver. You had the worst receiving core entering the draft. That is absolutely their biggest need, as you can see on my team needs. So Drake London, he's going to be a beast for them. I really like him. He's a great jump ball receiver. He's deceptive in his routes and his quickness for a guy of that size, and he's a rare talent. So you pair him with Kyle Pitts and what you can do with that versatility. Arthur Smith's going to have fun with those two guys. Arnold Ebiketie, I thought, could have been a first-round pick, and you get him early in the second round. Solid pick once again, and a guy with, I feel, a high floor. Very productive in college, not super athletic, but has a lot of tools to work with. I feel like Pease is going to get the best out of him, and he's going to be a day one starter. So you've got two guys that are going to make an immediate impact on both sides of the football. Troy Anderson is more of a project. I did feel it was maybe a little bit of a reach in the second round, but I love his tools, right? He's obviously a great story, playing quarterback in college, playing running back in college, but Troy can really move. I think he could develop into a great coverage linebacker. He needs work in the run game, but he's super athletic, and he's going to make your middle of your defense fast. Desmond Ridder was a shot in the dark. He was a dart throw. I can't blame them here. I am not a Desmond Ridder fan, so some that are will have this grade probably higher and the draft higher. I think he has a lot to clean up with his mechanics. If he can do that, he can be good because he has physical tools to work with. So overall, I felt like they addressed their biggest needs. Wide receiver, defensive end, quarterback. So overall, Atlanta did their most that they really could here. I feel like it's a B plus type of draft depending on how you feel about Desmond Ridder and if you feel like he can be the future. So I'm going to give it a B here for the Atlanta Falcons. Next up, we've got the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens had a spectacular draft, and I don't think this is going to be very crazy to say. I think a lot of people are going to agree with me when I say that because, to be honest with you, the Ravens are good at drafting. They know how to play the game. And on top of that, they usually just get steals. I don't know what it is, but they do it. And 2 first-round picks. So one of them, the Tyler Linderbaum pick, was for Marquise Brown at the end of the day, right? So they traded back as well. They really maneuver the board pretty well in Baltimore. But Baltimore was able to get the best safety in the draft and the best center in the draft. Whenever you can do that, you're likely going to get an A, right? That's just in the first round alone. Kyle Hamilton is a hybrid safety playmaker, can play nickel corner, can play strong or free safety. He's got great range, great size. He is going to be a great player for them. Tyler Linderbaum, although I don't really feel like the fit is spectacular there in more of a gap running scheme, he's usually a zone running center, right? Because he's a little bit smaller. He can move really well, but I do think his power is deceptive. So I want to see how he performs there in Baltimore because it's not his real good fit. I don't feel super confident about that translation, but he's such a talented player. It's hard to pass up there. Now, second round, David Ajabo has huge upside. Huge upside as a pass rusher. Could end up being by the end of this season their number 2 on the edge there in Baltimore. Travis Jones was a steal in the third round. I thought he was going to be an early second round pick. Great run defender with some pass rushing capabilities out of Connecticut. The third or fourth best interior defensive lineman in the draft. They get a massive man in Falele in the fourth round out of Minnesota, who just has huge size and has some developmental traits that makes him sort of like an Orlando Brown-ish type of guy. Jalen Amar Davis, or Armour Davis, however you say his name, but from Alabama. You can't go wrong with Alabama corners. He's got good size. He's got good length. He's got solid speed. And really, when you watch his tape, there's not many times he was burnt. So overall, he's somebody that's definitely worth taking a chance on in the fourth round. I had him maybe as like a third round type guy. I think he really fits Baltimore, and they're looking to upgrade the perimeter corner position there. So that pick definitely made sense. So overall, and they also get Isaiah Likely, a tight end that has a lot of receiving capabilities that could definitely contribute right away as a complement to Mark Andrews. So overall, man, Baltimore did a really, really good job. They got a lot of players that I feel like much of the draft community really had a crush on. So that's going to help their grade overall. But they get a center, which was one of their top needs. They get an interior defensive lineman. They get younger there, which was one of their top needs. They get an edge player to help their pass rush who has high upside. They get a safety to help their secondary. They also add a couple corners in the draft. So they pretty much addressed all their biggest needs. The only thing that hurt their grade from really being an A+ is they did get worse at the wide receiver position by losing Marquise Brown, which is a position that I value highly. So overall, I give the Ravens an A still. I think the value on their picks plus the quality of their picks was too strong to not give them an A, but I will not say it's an A+ just because they did get worse losing Marquise Brown at wide receiver. Next up, we've got the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills had a solid draft. For a team that's the favorite to win the Super Bowl, there's usually not a lot of players that can come in and impact your team right away. It's more of a 2 to 3 year type deal with a team like the Bills. But Kaiir Elam in the first round at pick 23 is a corner that's going to start right away on one of the perimeter spots. You've got Tre'Davious White, and he's probably going to be your number 2 from day one. He's got a lot of translatable traits in terms of his size, his physicality, his press coverage ability. I think that's going to help him. Plus, he got a little bit of man coverage ability that typically the Bills don't go for, but maybe could add some versatility to their secondary. They played more man last year than they've played in the past, so Elam could help them as a number 2 to help slow down some of the top passing attacks that they're going to face next year. James Cook is a very good receiving weapon at running back. He's also a pretty good zone runner. I think James Cook, the brother of Dalvin Cook from Minnesota, is a pretty good running back. I didn't have him as a second round guy, but if you use him in a multitude of ways, you could get a lot of value out of him, and he's arguably the most talented running back on your roster already just by being drafted there. Khalil Shakur is also an interesting name as a slot receiver to help replace the production of Cole Beasley. You also brought in Jamison Crowder. You have Isaiah McKenzie. So you've got a lot of different types of bodies and options there as receiving weapons. And you added some depth to linebacker, which is a big position for your defense. So always adding depth there is important. You added 2 of them, actually. So the Buffalo Bills, I would say this was a very solid draft. I would also give the Bills a B- type range. You know, I felt it was very solid for a team that wasn't looking to hit a home run this year. They were just looking to add the little bits that could put them over the top. Next up, we've got the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers, to me, had a A- draft. And the reason I say that is the Carolina Panthers got arguably the best tackle in the draft. That was their biggest need, in my opinion, entering this season besides quarterback. And then later in the draft, they trade up to get Matt Corral in a draft where they didn't have a lot of mid-round picks. I thought they did a good job here of recouping some of their potential home run capabilities here, because they got potentially an all-pro tackle with the 6th pick who fell to them. I thought Ekwonu was a top 5, top 3 prospect in this draft, so to get him at 6 was value in itself. And then on top of that, you get Matt Corral, who is my top quarterback in this class, and to me has the highest ceiling of all the quarterbacks, with the capability, just a laser arm, great release, great composure, great feet in the pocket. He could be really good. He could be your starter. So for that, I love this draft at the top. Brandon Smith is also a starting capable, you know what you're going to get linebacker. Like, he's going to come in from day one and be able to contribute. So overall, I feel like, especially the first 3 picks, the Panthers did what they could in this draft with limited capital. I think that they had a good draft here, especially if that Matt Corral pick hits. It could be an absolute home run draft where you're talking about a cornerstone tackle and a franchise quarterback. So this could be a big draft for the Carolina Panthers. The Chicago Bears are next. I was disappointed with the Bears draft, mostly because, you see a lot of picks here, a ton of picks actually. They had a lot of capital, they traded back, they are trying to improve this roster. You look at the Bears roster, it's really one of the worst in the NFL. There's no doubt about it. But you look at the Bears and I don't know if they got any difference makers in this draft. That's my problem with it, right? And that's usually the problem when you don't have a first round pick, or that you trade away your first round pick and you trade back. So the Chicago Bears, they get Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker, 2 players that I like, right? I like both of them. I specifically have been raving about Brisker's ability at safety as a hybrid guy that could play in the box, could play nickel, can play strong safety. He's going to be good for you, right? And then corner Kyler Gordon's going to be a nice number 2 corner on the outside and could develop even into that number 1 type guy on the opposite side of Jalen Johnson. So you've definitely upgraded the safety and the corner position and the secondary as a whole here, but I didn't feel like the secondary was the biggest needs. I felt like offensive line was the biggest need, and you really didn't address that much. You didn't address it until the 5th round, which I don't really know if that's going to be impactful enough for you. Plus the wide receiver position, 3rd round receivers can definitely hit here, but I felt like they reached on Jones in the 3rd round out of Tennessee. So overall, I just think, yes, they got a corner, yes, they got a safety, players that I like, right? Don't get me wrong, but they didn't address their biggest needs and really help Justin Fields until the late end of the draft. So that's really where I just don't love it. So I'm going to give them a C for this draft. Next, we've got the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals, they didn't have a ton of picks here. Typically, the Bengals are pretty quiet on draft day. They don't trade a lot during the draft. I give them a solid B because I think you look at the top of the draft with a 1st round, 2nd round pick of a corner and a safety. They definitely needed to help their secondary. So maybe they reached a little bit on Taylor Britt out of Nebraska in the late 2nd round. That maybe some people would argue that, but Daxton Hill, I think they got value on him at pick 31. He was a top 15 prospect in this draft for me personally. He could play nickel, he could play all the safety spots, he could maybe even play perimeter corner. He's got great speed, great length, great playmaking ability. He's going to be all over the defense from day one, and he's going to contribute in a multitude of ways with his versatility. But then you also get a corner in the 2nd round, which was arguably your biggest need to help replace Eli Apple on that perimeter spot or take over for Eli Apple, which was a big weakness in that Super Bowl. So I think that the Bengals just upgrading that secondary and getting some depth to help that out is a win in itself. On top of that, you add some depth to your defensive line, your offensive line, which I definitely felt you could have done in this draft. I felt like adding to the interior defensive line, adding to the offensive line that's kind of getting reworked this offseason was wise. So for the most part, and even you got a linebacker in the late rounds of the draft that I felt you also needed. So they addressed all their needs, certainly. Could they have maybe had more picks and gotten better players and stuff like that? Sure. But at the end of the day, they did what they had to do. It's not crazy or anything. It wasn't special to me, but it was a solid B, especially for a team that is a pretty darn good roster and a contender in the AFC. The Cleveland Browns are next, and overall, I like a couple of the players here. Martin Emerson feels like a great scheme fit, although possibly a little bit of a reach because he is pretty raw at the corner position. But at the end of the day, I just didn't feel like corner was a huge need on this team. I understand that there's a lot of corners, right, that you want to have on your team. That you can never have enough corners. Now, you did trade Troy Hill, so is Emerson part of the replacement plan for him? Is that ultimately a W there? I don't know. Emerson's very raw, so I don't know if he's going to be better than Troy Hill from day one at nickel or on the perimeter or whatever. Alex Wright, David Bell. David Bell's interesting, right? He could be potentially a slot receiver for your offense. He has basically no speed, though, so he's pretty much a route runner type guy. He has the skill set to contribute, but he's not very explosive. Winfrey was really interesting. I like him as a interior pass rushing guy. I felt like you could have added more size to your defensive line, and your defensive line did add some players here, but still a little bit thin. You do get a kicker. We'll see how that works out in the 4th round in York out of LSU. So he's going to be counted on from day one. You don't pick a kicker in the 4th round, he doesn't make the team. So Cleveland, I wasn't a huge fan of this draft, honestly. I'd probably give it a C just because, I didn't think corner was their biggest need. I felt like it was receiver. And then I felt like after that, it was defensive line and edge. So, yes, Hill being traded changes your plans, but getting a raw corner as your first pick is a little bit underwhelming for a team that is looking to compete for a Super Bowl. Winfrey is going to help your depth. Bell is going to help, but I don't know how good he's going to be. So at the end of the day, I'm not super wowed by this draft. It was not one of the worst, but certainly not one of the best. Next, you've got the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys, man, I felt like when the draft was unfolding, I wasn't super impressed with what they were doing. I guess it just wasn't as sexy as years past with the Cowboys, where typically they go after big names and guys that are at premium positions, But the Dallas Cowboys, I thought, did what they had to do. They added to their offensive line. They got a couple guys that are going to rather contribute to the depth of their offensive line at guard or tackle. And then at the same time, they got a future guard starter, a future depth tackle. They got a wide receiver who might even be their third receiver in Jalen Tolbert in the third round. I liked him quite a bit. And Sam Williams is really interesting, right? They lost Randy Gregory, and this guy's sort of similar in that he has off-the-field issues, but he's super talented out of Mississippi. So I could see this really being a good draft for them. They've got kind of some raw prospects here, especially a little bit riskier at the top with Tyler Smith and Sam Williams, but if they hit, they could be really good players, and Jalen Tolbert could end up being that replacement that you're looking for not CeeDee Lamb, but Amari Cooper and also Cedric Wilson. So, and you get a tight end to help out as your number 2 tight end. So, also, I almost forgot, Damone Clark was one of my favorite linebackers in the draft, and the only reason he fell was because of injury. So he has high upside and kind of reminds me of some of the Cowboys picks that they've made in the past on some injured guys. He probably won't play this year, but he'll play next year for sure, and he could be a playmaker. He fits their scheme very well. So the Cowboys, I'm going to give them a B. I think it's not a slam dunk draft, but they addressed all their needs, and you got some potential gems here in Dallas. Next, the Denver Broncos. Broncos is a tough one to evaluate because obviously their draft has a lot to do with getting Russell Wilson. So at the end of the day, they didn't have a first-round pick, but when you look at all the capital they still had left over, I still think they were able to get some players that are going to contribute to their team. Nick Bonitto, at the very least, is going to be a situational pass rusher in the NFL from day one, and he could be even more than that. I love his bend off the edge. I love his ability to get to the quarterback, and use his speed and finesse to get to quarterbacks. Greg Dulcich from UCLA, he was, I want to say, my 4th tight end in the draft, 3rd tight end in the draft. I liked him. He's got some vertical ability, some speed. He's not much of a blocker, but he's going to be a quality receiver and could compete for the number 1 tight end spot on this team. At the very least, he's going to be a solid number 2 receiving option there. And then they add to the corner position with some depth. That's always fine. Safety as well. Wide receiver as well. And then as well, they get a defensive lineman in Uzurike. Why did they draft the weirdest names? But anyways, this is a guy that's a big run stuffer. So they overall did a pretty good job of, with the picks that they had, getting guys that are going to contribute to a team looking to win the AFC Championship, looking to get to the Super Bowl. And I can't blame that whatsoever. So with the capital, I give them a B. Because I thought they could have added maybe more to the offensive line, but they did that throughout the offseason a little bit. So I can't really blame them for that too much. They get a tight end, they get safety, they get some positions that can help. Defensive end is always nice, so the Broncos get a B. Maybe a B-, somewhere around that range. Next, the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions, man, they had a good draft. They had a very good draft. This is what I'm talking about at the beginning of the video. They had potentially a franchise-altering draft. And that's something that you have to take into account. So at the end of the day, I give the Detroit Lions an A+. They get the best defensive end in the draft, period. Number 2, Aiden Hutchinson, day 1 contributor, day 1 force, day 1 10-sack type guy. That's the expectation for him. He's a game changer. Then you got Jameson Williams, one of my favorite players in the draft, my favorite receiver in the draft, the most explosive receiver in the draft. You're now going to have potentially a guy that could be a top 10 receiver in the NFL, a guy that can stretch the field, a guy that can create plays out of nothing, a number 1 receiver to add to your receiving core that you desperately needed. So you get 2 huge impactful positions with your first 2 picks in the top 12 of the draft. You get 2 of the top 12 players. And then Josh Paschal. Josh Pascal's a good football player. He's got versatility to play inside or outside. He's got some strength to him. I feel like he's one of those, because this regime often comes from the Saints. He's got some Cam Jordan type qualities to him. I'm not saying he's going to be Cameron Jordan, but he's got that type of style. So I think Pascal can be, at the very least, a rotation player and potentially a future starter. And then you add safety, which you needed. You add depth at tight end in James Mitchell, who I actually think is a good player, and he had some injury issues in really his college career, which held him back. You get a couple other guys at linebacker, Rodriguez, Houston. You needed some linebacker depth. We'll see how they develop. But ultimately, I think this is a great draft. I think just the fact that this could be an franchise-altering draft. You get DN and wide receiver. Besides quarterback and cornerback, that is the two other positions where you could change your team with those guys. So Lions, A+, absolutely. And even some of their later picks are good, too. The Packers, I hate to say this, but you guys had an absolutely great draft. I've been ripping the Packers, definitely. I've been disappointed with the Packers front office, without a doubt. But I think the Packers, at the end of the day, put themselves back into the NFC contender conversation with this draft. I think they got two immediate contributors on defense. Quay Walker is going to start alongside Devondre Campbell at linebacker, and very similar player to Campbell. I kind of said that he's got similar length, similar size, similar athleticism. I think he's more athletic, and I think he could be a very good player in this system. Devontae Wyatt is a pass rushing machine from the interior that's going to help you compete with the Matthew Staffords and the Tom Bradys and the Dak Prescotts in the NFC playoffs. And Devontae Wyatt's the best interior pass rusher in this draft. You get him 28th. That's good. You get my favorite player in the draft, Christian Watson. Second best receiver in the draft, according to me. And a explosive X-receiver for Aaron Rodgers to replace Devontae Adams. He's not going to be refined from day one. He's certainly going to make an impact. Sean Ryan from UCLA, one of my favorite linemen in the draft in the third round, got great feet, great run blocking ability, fits this zone scheme perfectly with his ability to move in space. He might even start, right? Dobbs from Nevada has some speed, some vertical stretchability, just like Christian Watson. Kind of a lesser Christian Watson in a lot of ways. So he's going to add speed as well. So you've got two guys here that are big, speedy targets for Aaron Rodgers that add another dimension to what you already have with Sammy Watkins, Allen Lazard, Randall Cobb, Amari Rodgers, kind of the smaller interior receivers. Zach Tom, a lot of people like as a tackle. I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes a starter one day. So this draft overall is pretty darn impressive, especially through 4 rounds. I think you've got potentially 7 starters in this draft, which is really good. I mean, this to me is an A+ draft. A+, which I didn't think I was going to say after the first round when you didn't get a receiver. But the fact you traded up and got Christian Watson makes me happy. And then I think those offensive line picks are being slept on. Very quality picks there. So I think the Packers had a great draft. The Houston Texans are next. The Houston Texans, I think some people will look at this draft and say it's one of the best. I think it's like a little bit above average because I still stand by my opinion of Derek Stingley. I do think that's too aggressive, too risky of a pick at 3rd overall. The fact that he's played 10 games in 2 years just scares me overall. The fact that he's a corner in a system, in a scheme that doesn't value corners traditionally, even though I felt like it was a need. Everything on your team's a need. So ultimately, I would have liked to have seen you guys address the defensive line and the offensive line a bit more than you did maybe, potentially. Wide receiver, you get John Mechie, who's everyone's favorite guy. Great route runner. Going to be probably immediately your number 2 receiver from day one if he's healthy. Jalen Petrie is one of my favorites. Love his versatility. Love his playmaking ability. Play nickel. Play free safety. Kenyon Green's a warrior, a beast. Got some versatility as well. He's a day 1 starter. So potentially you have 4, maybe 5 day 1 starters. Stingley, Green, Petrie, Mechie. Harris even. Harris has got good athleticism. I don't think he's going to start right away, but he could develop, and I like his fit in this defense. I'm not sure about Stingley's fit as mostly a man coverage corner and not a zone corner. I think Christian Harris really fits. His fluidness, his athleticism, I think he could really fit there. And Pierce is a guy I like. He's a bowling ball of a running back. I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about Pierce in like week 12, week 13 as like a fantasy pickup. Like that type of guy where you're really impressed with his play at the end of the year. So actually, really talking about it now, I feel like this is a better draft than I gave it credit for. I think this is like a B+. A B+ draft. I didn't love the riskiness at the top, but I felt like you got some really solid contributors. Maybe not a lot of superstars here, but some good starters that's going to help the foundation of this roster. The Indianapolis Colts are a team that are kind of on that borderline of like, were they a playoff team? Were they not a playoff team? And with how the Titans approached the draft and how they traded A.J. Brown and then what the Colts were able to do here, I think the Colts catapulted them far and beyond the Tennessee Titans. So I think at the end of the day, that's a huge W. So some of it is the Titans trading A.J. Brown, but some of it is what the Colts did here, starting with Alec Pierce. He's going to be a number 2 receiver from day one. Number 2 opposite Michael Pittman. Alec Pierce has got great vertical speed. He can win at the line of scrimmage on his releases. He's a pretty good route runner. I think he needs to develop a bit more in terms of getting more flexible in his hips. To be able to run some of those short and intermediate routes. But he's going to win contested footballs in the air. He's going to win vertically. Jelani Woods is an interesting pick in the 3rd round. Another big tight end for the Colts. Adding some depth there. You replace Jack Doyle with that pick, so I get it. Bernard Ryman, Connor McLeod from Central Michigan. I thought he was going to go in the 2nd round. High 2nd round, actually. So I thought this was a great value. He's a little bit older of a prospect, so that's probably why he fell. But that being said, for a team that's looking to win right now, who has Matt Ryan, that's a great pick because you're getting a guy that's maybe going to start at left tackle this year, or at least down the road, potentially this year or next year. So great stuff from Ryman there in the 3rd round. Nick Cross is really fast at the safety position. Can cover a lot of ground at free safety. So that's a position that I do think was kind of an underrated need for the Indianapolis Colts, or at least having a 3rd, 4th safety in there in that rotation. So overall, I think the Colts, for not having a 1st round pick, it was a good draft. I would say the Colts got a B+ for me because they got the receiver, they got another tight end, they got a left tackle. So they got at least 2 potential starters here, and they've got 2 contributors in their first 4 picks without having a 1st round pick. So assessing what they had and giving a grade, I'd say it's a B+. Next, Jacksonville. Jacksonville, it's a tough one for me. I think that they did a solid job here. It's hard not to do a solid job when you have 2 1st round picks, but when you really assess it, I do feel like maybe they didn't get the most value throughout this course of this draft. I think Chad Muma is an example of a value pick that they made at pick 70 that they didn't necessarily need. And for a team that needed some other positions, that could still use some work in certain areas like wide receiver, they didn't even pick a receiver in this draft. So that's interesting. And, how much did you really help your guy, Trevor Lawrence? You got a center, a running back, a tight end. Running back who's going to be at best your 3rd running back, okay? I know his name's Snoop, but 3rd running back. You got a center who's going to be maybe a starter eventually, maybe even day 1 in Fortner, but that's it. I mean, that's the only guy that's helping Trevor Lawrence. Wide receivers, nothing. Tight ends, 6th round. I mean, Offensive tackles, nothing. So that hurts this grade for me. I like the 2 playmakers on defense, Trayvon Walker and Devin Lloyd, although I wouldn't have picked Trayvon Walker first. I think it was a good pick, and Devin Lloyd I loved as my number 1 linebacker. So stuff to like, stuff to not like here. Jacksonville, I would give a B- because even though they got some talented players, when you compare it to like Indianapolis, they got more talent than Indianapolis, but they didn't necessarily use their picks to the best way that they could. Kansas City, oh my goodness, it hurts for me to say. You guys know that I lead the charge of Kansas City hatred over here on the BLV, mostly just to troll, but it's fun too, because Chiefs Kingdom gets a little cocky sometimes. Somebody's got to put a cap on it. But the Kansas City Chiefs, man, you guys had a spectacular draft. I think this is an A+ draft. I mean, you look till the third round, you get starters. Like, that's pretty darn good on a team as good as Kansas City. You get Trent McDuffie, day one starter, nickel or outside perimeter corner. George Karlaftis, day one starter. Sky Moore, maybe the most talented receiver on the team from the first practice. Brian Cook, a really good box safety who might start this year as a early downs player, I would say. Leo Chanel, who is an awesome linebacker. I would argue he's more talented than the linebackers you got the last couple of years. So that is a spectacular draft right there. And Kansas City really needed to hit on this draft because with trading Tyreek Hill, a lot of people were paying close attention to what they did here. It's interesting that they mostly went with helping their defense. But they did get Sky Moore to help out Patrick Mahomes. Ultimately, all they really needed on offense was a receiver, and they got Sky Moore here. But they also addressed all their biggest needs on defense. Their defense was bad last year, and I thought it was going to be bad entering this season. And it might still take a bit of time for these young guys to contribute. But down the road, these picks are really going to pay off for helping the longevity of Mahomes' winning spree with a defense that can definitely play. So Kansas City, really awesome draft. Las Vegas, the host city here. Not a ton of picks. Obviously, Devontae Adams, the guy that was the big pickup for the Raiders. I give them a C+. I think for the most part, they did average. They got positions of need. I think Parham could be potentially a guy that competes for a starting spot right away. White was a confusing pick. I think he's a good player, don't get me wrong, and a good prospect, which is probably why they picked him, because they saw value there. But at the end of the day, I don't know how much he's going to contribute to your team unless you get rid of Josh Jacobs at some point within the next couple of years, and then maybe that changes this look at this pick. But then I liked what you did with adding depth again to the defensive and offensive lines, which is always a smart way to go, especially given the way that the defense was currently built. You needed some depth on the D-line. I like especially Matthew Butler out of Tennessee. So the Raiders there, I think they addressed their needs. They just didn't have a ton of picks to do it with. So ultimately, probably one starter or guy that competes for a starting spot, and the rest are going to be depth players. I give it a C+. The Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers, for a team that was making a lot of splashes in the offseason, had a very, calm draft. They didn't do anything crazy here. They didn't go over the top. They didn't have a super sexy draft, but I thought it was a quality one for what they needed. They got Zion Johnson, who could start at right tackle or right guard, so they added a starter day one to help protect Justin Herbert, which was a big spot of need, as you could see. JT Woods is going to be your third safety, maybe even could potentially be your number 2 down the road, but he's going to complement what you already have in Adderley and Derwin James. Isaiah Spiller was one of my favorite running backs in the draft. Really love his vision, love his ability to make cuts and make people miss. Day one player, he's got the vision, he's got the feet, he's got the blocking ability, the receiving ability. He's going to contribute as a complement to Austin Eckler right away. Ogbonnia from UCLA adds more size and depth to the defensive line, which is nice to see. I also felt like the Georgia tackle as well, Ultras boy, could be a starter in a couple of years. I don't think he's going to be a starter right now, but I like the edge he plays with. I like the size, the profile of a potential down-the-road starter at right tackle. So I think that's a good pick as well. Then you've got the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams didn't obviously have a first or second round pick, which they typically don't. I think they hit most of their needs. I'm not a huge fan of really any of these prospects, personally, but I thought they did a good job of addressing what they needed to address. They got multiple cornerbacks to add some depth to the secondary, which they desperately needed because they lost Darius Williams. They needed some offensive linemen because, the age of their offensive line, Andrew Whitworth leaving there, and then on top of that, just overall needing some interior help. And then they get a running back, which I don't love that pickup because they've got 3 already. I mean, he could be a good player. Don't get me wrong. They get Lake, who's a legacy player in the NFL. So nothing crazy here. The Rams are already a very good team that pretty much have all their starters intact right now. They maybe get one starter here for this year, but other than that, they pretty much get some depth, but that's what the Rams kind of need because they've got so many studs. They've got the top of the roster filled out, but they need some quality depth, and we'll see if they can get that. I give them a C+. The Miami Dolphins, I'm going to give a C. They only had 4 picks here. I know that some people will say, well, Mitch, they had Tyreek Hill. Like, yeah, I get that. I'm not really including that. I'm just looking at like what they got with their picks. So quarterback, 7th round. I don't think that's really going to do anything. I'd be surprised if he's on the team in like 2 years. Then you've got Channing Tindall in the 3rd round, who could be a linebacker and could contribute maybe this year, maybe next year. I think he could play in some base downs and some base packages. Wide receiver, I didn't think you really needed. You've got 3 or 4 receivers that are capable. I don't know how much he's going to contribute. So I just felt like the Dolphins didn't really get much in terms of their areas of need. I felt like they could have went out and tried to get a nickel corner. Somebody like a Marcus Jones type that New England got, like somebody of that ilk. I felt like they could have used a nickel corner. I felt like they could have used potentially safety depth. I feel like they could have potentially used offensive line depth. So they didn't do any of that to me, and that's why I don't really love this draft. The Minnesota Vikings are next. The Vikings, I think, had a pretty solid draft. I wouldn't say it was spectacular. They got, I think, 2 first-round talents in Lewis Cine and Andrew Booth. I think Andrew Booth has a lot of potential to be a great corner on the perimeter for them, and he could arguably be their most talented corner from day one if he is healthy. Lewis Cine is going to start right away, so you got potentially 2 starters there. Ed Ingram, you got maybe 3 starters there. Ed Ingram in the 2nd round. I like Ed Ingram, and maybe he was a little bit overdrafted for consensus. I liked him. I think he's shown that he's got a lot of experience from LSU. I think from day one he's going to compete for a starting spot, so could be an upgrade to that interior offensive line, which has needed an upgrade for years. Asamoah from Oklahoma has got a lot of raw ability as a coverage linebacker, and I didn't love this pick. I like the player, and I don't mind the scheme fit either. He helps their coverage defense, but I just feel like they didn't really need a linebacker. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong there. But they brought in Hicks. They've got Eric Kendricks. I didn't think linebacker was a pressing need. I think they could have went elsewhere. I was honestly surprised they didn't go with a receiver earlier, just given Kevin O'Connell and where he comes from with the Rams. They pick a receiver high basically every year there. So the Vikings, I thought, had a solid draft. I would give it a B overall. A B sounds about right. Then we've got the New England Patriots. The Patriots had a rather confusing draft, but when you look at it on the outside looking in, I think what they did here was not bad. They reached for a lot of players. They didn't play the game of the draft very well. They could have got more value. They probably could have got more picks, so that certainly hurts their grade. But looking at the players and the strategy, right? They got a guard who's going to start. Cole Strange is going to be probably good. Knowing New England and how they draft linemen, I don't think they've ever drafted a lineman that high that has sucked. So Cole Strange is going to be good. I'm just putting that out there right now. Tyquan Thornton, wide receiver, a reach. I would have preferred many other receivers in that spot, especially Sky Moore. I would have been jacked. But Tyquan Thornton ran a 4.28. Right, Jack Jones, Marcus Jones, cornerback. Marcus Jones I love. I think he's going to be down the road their nickel corner for years, like Jonathan Jones has been. And I think from day one, he helps them in terms of their matchups, especially against their division, because they got a lot of fast, twitchy receivers. And I think Marcus Jones is going to be able to cover some of those guys from day one and also give you a returner as well. He was one of the best college football returners of all time. Jack Jones has a lot of upside. Had some off the field issues, but a lot of upside. He could turn into a perimeter corner down the road. Probably not right away, but down the road. So 4 guys that could contribute and potentially become starters. Now, Tyquan Thornton and Pierre Strong, 2 guys that are very fast. Wide receiver, 4.28, fastest receiver. I believe Pierre Strong ran a 4.37, which was the fastest running back time in the 40. So both guys can run, and the Patriots needed to get faster. So when talking about it that way, they did that. They got faster. Even Marcus Jones, he's fast, right? They got tougher with Cole Strange. So I see what they were trying to do. Now, would I have liked some different players when they picked? Yes, and I probably would look at this draft a little bit differently. So ultimately, I give it a C+. I think they got some contributors. I think their strategy was sound. I just feel like I wasn't a huge fan of a lot of the players, and I wasn't a huge fan of how they played the board, that they reached a lot. But ultimately, a guy like Sam Roberts, he was a stud at his level of play there. I believe won the College Football Player of the Year at his level of competition. Could be an interior pass rusher down the road. I didn't love the quarterback pick. Maybe he's a Brian Hoyer for Mac Jones. Maybe that's what they're looking for there. But in the 4th round, I mean, you could have, again, addressed another position of need there with a priority pick. In the top 4 round, you're still looking for good players. Hines is interesting, as well as Stuber. Both of those guys they project to be pretty interesting. Big programs. New England typically likes those type of offensive linemen. They both have the makings of being guys that could be the next Michael Onwenu, and I wouldn't be surprised if one of them is. So I think there's a lot of stuff to like here, Patriots fans. I wouldn't be too upset, even though we did kind of mess the value stuff up a little bit. The New Orleans Saints is next. The Saints didn't have a ton of picks here. They only had 5. They had to trade up for Chris Olave. I think this was probably the most predictable draft that anybody had. They went receiver, offensive tackle, cornerback. As you can see by my team needs, receiver, tackle, cornerback. So they went in order of my needs here. But, I mean, they got a number 2 receiver, Chris Olave, maybe even a number 1 down the road if Michael Thomas leaves. Trevor Penning is going to be your starting left tackle from the first practice. And Alontae Taylor is going to be competing for a number 2 corner spot. So you potentially have 3 starters out of this draft out of 5 picks, which to me would be a successful draft, even though they didn't have a ton of picks. So I have to give this a solid grade, even though I'm not the biggest fan of Chris Olave. I'm not the biggest fan of Trevor Penning. I'm not the biggest fan of Alontae Taylor. They addressed all their needs. They got potentially 3 starters. That's all I can really say about it. They got a B+ for me. And I also like how Chris Olave is going to add to Jameis Winston this year and make them way more explosive offensively. I will say that. Next, the New York Giants. The Giants, I think a lot of people are going to give them like an A+. I would give them an A. I would just slightly move down from an A+. Kayvon Thibodeau is part of the reason. I'm not the biggest fan of Kayvon's game. I do feel he was a bit overhyped, a bit overrated. He's a great fit for Don Martindale in that he's twitchy, he's athletic, he's got a great first step, so those things will really help, but he doesn't have great bend. And that's something that I think when you're picking a defensive end in the top 5, you need to have that elite trait of bend. And I don't think Thibodeau really has that. But I do think he fits the mold of a Martindale edge player. So as long as he stays in check and he lives up to the hype and he works hard, he will be productive in that defense. And he fit a position of need big time. Evan Neal, my favorite player in the draft, is a huge reason I like this draft because Evan Neal is awesome. And from day one, he's going to be one of the best right tackles in the NFL. That's really what I feel about that guy. Wan'Dale Robinson, didn't really understand this one in the second round. I felt like they could have went with a corner here. I felt like they could have went with multitude of different positions. I mean, they could have went with a quarterback. They could have went with a guard. They could have went with a lot of positions, linebackers, like a lot of positions. So I was just a little confused by the receiver pick because I feel like they've got receivers. So I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. They do get a guard in the 3rd round. So he'll compete for a starting spot like that. They get a corner in the 3rd round as well. So, based on their evaluation, we'll see how it goes. But I feel like they addressed most of their needs. I just, not a lot of standout names and players that I really love. So Evan Neal is my guy. I mean, that's my guy. So at the end of the day, I look at the Giants draft and I say, they got a tackle, they got an edge player, they got a cornerback, they addressed the interior offensive line, they got, what else? A tight end even. That was a need. So when you look at their draft, it's almost in order of like, what was your biggest need? Let's check it off. So they did that, and I definitely give them props for that, and I think that helps both their depth, and they get, 2, maybe 3 starters from this draft, week 1. So that's pretty good for the Giants. A. New York Jets. The Jets get an A+. Why? Well, this is what I'm talking about with premier positions. They get Sauce Gardner, cornerback. Garrett Wilson, wide receiver. And Jermaine Johnson, defensive end. 3 high priority positions. 3 positions that if these guys hit, they're all making $20 million a year. So in the first round, right? In the first round, I'm not sure why the Jermaine Johnson one says round 2, but in the first round, they get a corner, receiver, D end, all players that I like. Sauce Gardner was maybe my top guy in the draft. Him and Evan Neal were 1 and 2. Garrett Wilson was not my favorite receiver in the draft, but I see a lot of talent. I think he's going to be good. He's a well-rounded receiver. The Wilson-Wilson connection just sounds like it's going to be good. Jermaine Johnson, one of my favorite players in the draft as well, fits this scheme perfectly. You could tell how excited they were. I think they were the most excited to pick Jermaine Johnson in this draft, and they picked him 26th. He's a beast. He's going to set the tempo from the edge, and I feel like he's got a upside that I don't think Kayvon Thibodeau has, and he got picked 5th overall. So Jermaine Johnson on the opposite side of Carl Lawson, that's going to be explosive. Breece Hall is arguably the best running back in the draft. You get him, who can catch the ball, run the ball. He's explosive, good vision. Jeremy Ruckert was one of the best tight ends in the draft. You get him, who's well-rounded, can block, can catch, can do a lot of things. Then you add some depth to your D-line and O-line. Perfect. So, I mean, Douglas hit this one out of the damn park. I think this is an A+. The Philadelphia Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles also get an A for me, a pretty strong A. The only thing holding back from an A+ is the fact that they had to pay A.J. Brown $100 million. But besides that, I mean, you get Jordan Davis, one of my man crushes in this draft. The guy is an absolute monster. He's going to be a terror in the NFL. He's going to be one of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFL for a long time, in my opinion. Cam Jurgens is, Jason Kelce loves this guy. I mean, you could just tell how excited he was, and learning from Jason Kelce is certainly going to help. So they add to their interior offensive line for the future. You can't hate on that. Maybe it's not a right away sort of pick, but down the road it will help. Nakobe Dean, down the road is going to help, I think. And I think he's in a perfect spot because he's behind a massive defensive line, so he can do what he does best, and that's read plays, that's blitz, that's make plays with his mind. So Nakobe Dean, awesome leader for that defense for the future. So I think this is an A. And then, of course, you get A.J. Brown. I think this is an A for the Philadelphia Eagles. Then you got the Pittsburgh Steelers. This one was a really difficult one for me to grade because it's a very, high upside, low floor type of draft because Kenny Pickett could be good. He could suck. I mean, quarterback, 20th overall. You never know what you're going to get. George Pickens, he could be amazing. He could be a bust. DeMarvin Leal also as well. I mean, Leal, whatever, however you say his name. He's kind of a tweener of a defensive end. Kind of a classic Pittsburgh Steelers 3-4 defensive end. Got good pass rushing ability. But again, he's got an upside, but third round, it was worth it for sure. I like the value. Don't get me wrong here, but I just see a lot of boom or bust. Calvin Austin is 5'5", right? He could be amazing. He could be Tyler Lockett. He could also be Tavon Austin. So, you know what I mean? So I just look at the Pittsburgh Steelers draft and I say, yeah, I mean, you could have your franchise quarterback. You could have a number 1 receiver. You could have a good defensive end. You could have a number 2 receiver in this draft in your first 4 picks. And that's incredible. But you could also have bust. So that's the way that I look at it. On top of, you didn't get any offensive linemen, which I just don't understand whatsoever. Maybe last draft, so you're trying to go out with a bang, but man, I don't know, Pittsburgh. I'm going to give you a B because I'm higher on Kenny Pickett than others. I'm higher on Calvin Austin than others. I'm not as high on George Pickens as others, but the Steelers drafted him, so I have to put some onus on that because the Pittsburgh Steelers are good at drafting receivers, but likely only one of those guys will hit. Connor Hayward is cool to get, because Cam Hayward's brother and all that. And DeMarvin Leal will be a potential starter down the road. So I think it's a B draft for me because I just don't know. The riskiness is a lot for me to handle. The San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers, I think they had an underwhelming draft. I really thought they had an opportunity here to add some quality players to positions of need in the mid-rounds, but they more so did that at the end of the draft. I don't know, maybe they felt very strong about some of the players they picked here at corner, offensive line, later in the draft, which is what they did, rounds 4 through 6, but 2, 3, those rounds, right, Drake Jackson, Davis Price, Gray, they add receivers, running backs, and DNs. I mean, those are positions they don't need. They don't need running backs. They don't need really receivers. They don't need defensive ends, really. I love Drake Jackson. I think he's a great fit. I think he's going to be a good player. I think it was a good value. I thought he was going to be a first-round pick based on Adam Schefter's reports. So, don't get me wrong. Good pick. He's a good player. But I just didn't think that was their top need. Same as Davis Price, who third-round running back, you could certainly pass on that. I mean, you could get a running back later on, draft a corner there, draft a safety there, draft something a little bit more meaningful to your roster and your needs. Danny Gray, same sort of deal. Maybe he's a number 3 in the NFL, sure, but I don't know. You got other positions. So the Niners, they just kind of frustrated me with how they approached it from top to bottom, but I do see that they kind of tried to attack some of their positions in the rest of the draft where they got 2 offensive linemen and 2 corners, and they tried to address it through numbers, right? So the 49ers, I'm going to give a C for this draft, but I could see it backfiring on me down the road. The Seattle Seahawks, I don't know why this is so underwhelming for people. I actually think this is a good draft. I think Charles Cross was a steal at pick 9. I think he's a franchise left tackle. Boye Mafe, I think, is a very capable starting defensive end. And I think he's going to start the first season. He's a good player with high upside. Yes, he's a little bit raw, but man, he's going to give them a boost in the pass rushing department. And they don't have a lot of talent at defensive end. So their first 2 picks, they get their 2 top needs. I can't blame them for that whatsoever. Kenneth Walker is the best running back in this class, in my opinion. He's super explosive. He's a difference maker. If I was to draft a running back in this class in the second round, it's Kenneth Walker without a shadow of a doubt. Abraham Lucas, also a guy that could start at tackle. So you get 2 tackles in the first 3 rounds that could become starters from day one. Kobe Bryant, I can't blame the name whatsoever. Kobe Bryant was pretty productive at Cincinnati. They had a great secondary there. He fits their scheme pretty well as Tariq Woolen. That guy's got a really great profile of athleticism with speed and length. So they get 2 guys that are rather interesting for their scheme long term. I think this is a good draft, man. Honestly, I gave the Seattle Seahawks a B+. I think this is a good draft. I don't know what people are talking about. I've seen a couple negative reviews for this one. They hit all the needs that they possibly could address here outside of quarterback. And I think that's maybe why people are kind of frustrated. But hey, I didn't want them to pick a quarterback this year. I think they should take their time on that spot. And Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it's tough when you've got probably the best roster in the NFL, so you don't really have much to address here. But the Tampa Bay Bucs did get some day one contributors. Logan Hall is going to be a hybrid defensive lineman that can do a lot of different things and give some versatility to some looks that Bowles brings. He's definitely going to help the interior pass rush, which I think needed a boost a little bit with Sue getting older and William Golston getting older. So it feels like a William Golston type guy. Lucas Godke, I saw an interview with that guy. That guy wants to hurt people, so I love it already. He's going to probably start over Aaron Stinney, and if he's able to do that, that looks like a good pick from day one. So if you get 2 guys that are going to contribute on a good roster, those are 2 good picks. Rachaad White, I saw some Bucs reporters not loving this pick. I really like Rachaad White. He was in my top 5 running backs in the class. I'm not sure if he was drafted that way, but to me, he looked like a David Johnson type of guy. Like, he had the explosiveness as a runner. He had the hands, the receiving ability. Maybe not a power guy, but somebody that could really burn and really hit the hole with acceleration. He's a guy that if Leonard Fournette got hurt, I feel like he could give 3-down utility and really help as a backup running back. Cade Otton could be a steal there from Washington. I saw a stat that he had like 53 first downs or something like that over his career at Washington. In a limited passing offense there, Washington, I feel like he could be long-term their starting tight end if he develops correctly. They get a starting punter in Carmarda, so from Georgia. As a punter, but he's going to be a punter he's going to start. He's a 4th rounder, and they're going to get rid of Pinion, and they're going to get $2 million for it. So, hey, I love that too. And then McCollum, I like McCollum. He's got speed. He's got a great 3-cone. I think he had like the best 3-cone of all time, better than like Julian Edelman stuff. So McCollum is, man, he might be good with Todd Bowles coaching him. He's got a lot of physical tools. He's pretty raw, but as their 4th or 5th corner probably makes the team. He's got some Jamel Dean in him as like a specimen, and he could be a darn good player on the inside or the outside because he's got the agility and the straight line speed and the size. So that's a rare prospect to find in the 5th round, honestly. So with what the Bucs needed and with what they got, maybe they could have gotten a receiver. That I know fans wanted a receiver, but I understand not getting one after signing Russell Gage. They obviously feel confident about Chris Godwin, and maybe they're looking at somebody like Julio Jones in free agency or something like that, but I know they got like Scotty Miller and Brashad Perryman. Like they got lots of receivers. I just know that was flirted with throughout the offseason. Edge, I feel like they could have got an edge guy maybe, and that maybe would have gave them an A for me, but I think ultimately this is like a B plus type of draft for the Bucs. For what they needed, they got. So Bucs with a solid draft. The Tennessee Titans, this was interesting. I didn't expect them to trade A.J. Brown, but they basically traded A.J. Brown for his replacement in Treylon Burks, who's a lot like A.J. Brown, explosive playmaker, and is going to be utilized in a multitude of ways. He's a big-time vertical playmaker. Big hands, big lower half, big junk in the trunk type guy. And he's going to make some plays, man. And long term, could he develop into A.J. Brown? Sure. But I did feel like he was one of the more risky prospects in the 1st round of this draft. Roger McCreary, I love his fight. I love his viciousness, his tenaciousness as a corner. Like I've said many times, reminds me of Malcolm Butler. Sticky guy, could probably play nickel, but could also play on the outside. I think Petit Ferrer, I believe is how you say his name, from Ohio State, is like a perfect Titan offensive lineman. He's maybe going to play guard. I'm not sure, but tackle, I feel like he's a run-first guy. He needs to develop as a pass blocker, but he could definitely, I just see him as a Titans offensive lineman because they prefer those power blockers, and I think that's what he is. Malik Willis, quarterback, that could be a home run pick in the 3rd round, and the risk is very low there with Malik Willis in the 3rd round. A lot of people thought he was going to go in the 1st round, so that could be a steal there. He could make people pay for that. And Haskins, running back from Michigan. Okay, you had some depth. Kyle Phillips from UCLA. Okay, you had some depth at wide receiver as well. Like, overall, you pretty much addressed most of your needs. Maybe you could have went offensive line again in this draft, but you didn't. Maybe you could have went interior defensive line for some depth, but you didn't. So overall, I got the Titans with a solid B. I think, it hurts losing A.J. Brown. You're objectively worse there. But you get potentially a long-term solution at quarterback, a good corner who's going to start for many years. Treylon Burks could be a superstar receiver, could not be a superstar receiver. And then you got maybe a starting offensive lineman. So solid draft. And the final draft is the Washington Commanders. The Commanders here, I just felt like they didn't get a ton of difference makers. Jahan Dotson, I felt like they kind of reached on him, to be honest with you. I like him a lot, and I didn't see too much discrepancy between him and Chris Olave. I thought actually Jahan Dotson was just as good, if not better, due to his toughness on the inside making plays. But he's somebody that's going to be a number 2 for Terry McLaurin. And, drafting a number 2 receiver in the first round is, it's not super exciting or anything. Like, I see Dotson as a number 2 in the NFL. I don't see him as a big-time number 1. Maybe I'm wrong with that evaluation, but Dotson's a good player, and this is the thing with him, though. Like, he's a pretty safe pick. Like, I don't see him being bad in the NFL. Math is similar. Like, I think he's going to be solid, but maybe you kind of reached for a run-stopping defensive tackle at a position of strength. So, I don't know about that. Brian Robinson, you didn't really need a running back, so I'm not sure why you went with him, but, he's a solid player. Percy Butler could be a really good pick. He's got great speed, great range as a safety, can really cover. That could be a really good pick at a position in need that I thought you should have picked earlier. Sam Howell could be a steal at quarterback. Kind of reminds me of Gardner Minshew. So you got some of your needs there, but I don't think you got a lot of impact players. Jahan Dotson's certainly going to make an impact. Mathis is going to be depth. Robinson's going to be depth. Howell's going to be depth for now. Butler's going to be maybe a starter down the road, but probably depth for now. So for day one, you really only got one player that's going to contribute right away. So that's why I give the Commanders a C+. Those are my NFL draft grades for the 2022 NFL draft. Let me know what you thought of my grades. Let me know where I was right, where I was wrong, and let me know what your grade is for your favorite team in the comment section below. It's Mitch. Thanks for watching. Peace!